if you would like to go ahead and share your screen while I read your introduction, and we can go ahead and get started. All right. So last up, but not least, we have troubleshooting PDF export errors with Valerie Addonizio of Atlas Systems. This presentation will include demonstration and troubleshooting of some common PDF export errors, guidance for understanding error log messages, and tips for identifying and resolving the encoding issues that are usually to blame. Valerie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So as you can hopefully see on my screen, hello. This presentation is based on my experience hosting customers, supporting customers, hosting ArchivesSpace at Atlas Systems, a registered service provider. I don't see these errors as often as I used to, but I do hope this information is helpful to some of you. I will be essentially presenting my brain as a flowchart when I see spreadsheet export errors. And these are the errors that you get when you are attempting to export, I said spreadsheet, when you are attempting to export a PDF version of a finding aid on the staff side in particular. So this flowchart, before you panic and try to take a screenshot of it, don't worry. You are going to get, if you go to the wiki and you see this is my session right here, there is a handout. You can download not only what you see on the screen, but the PDF version has not only what you see on the screen, but it has some handy facts, especially this working with XML section, which is going to become relevant to you later when I start suddenly working in a development environment and you say, but I don't have that. Don't worry, download my handout. You'll get this. And you'll also get some easy instructions on how to get some free tools, the exact same tools that I'm using with you today. So let's start on the top of our flowchart. We're not going to read every single one of these boxes because that's just not possible for 20 minutes. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to work you through the primary logic, and anything that's a white box with dotted lines is essentially a sidebar or a clarification or something that's not really necessary for the solving of your problem, but it is there for additional information or as prompts so that you don't have to rewatch this presentation. So at the very top, you see me state our problem. Whoops, I went in really tight, but I'm going to go here. I'm going to back up a little bit. That's too tight. So you have a PDF export error in ArchivesSpace. I'm reading up here. And this is the key point. This is the only thing that you really need to take away from today if you ever get PDF export errors in ArchivesSpace. Next line, all PDF exports begin as EAD exports with a style sheet transformation that creates a PDF. This is the most important takeaway. Next sentence, troubleshooting PDFs means troubleshooting XML in general and possibly EAD in particular. For those of you who may be EAD veterans, that might have been a light bulb moment for you. And for those of you who aren't, just know that even though you're getting an error because you've requested a PDF, the PDF itself isn't the problem. The EAD file that was generated as the first step to creating that PDF was the problem. And that is where all of your troubleshooting and all of your special skills and all of my, like the logic I'm giving you here should be applied. So over here, I walk you through the idea that the error, so starting here, is probably one of two scenarios. I've only seen two scenarios, so maybe my flowchart is incomplete. But scenario A and scenario B is where we're going to start. We're going to spend most of our time, we're going to spend 50-50, but most of the errors are actually scenario B. So scenarios A and B correspond to two different kinds of error messages. Here, if the error message says validation exception, you are in scenario A. If the error message says parse exception, you are in scenario B. And I can show those to you. So here I have generated a PDF. I got an error message, and it is my parse exception error message right there. Here I've generated another PDF export error, and here is my validation exception error message. So I just want you to know that that's what you're looking for, these two words. You can ignore all the rest of this, by the way. You only ever really need to read the second line down. So with that in mind, I want to say that both of these exception error messages are XML errors, because I just told you that you're looking really at an EAD file that's gone wrong. And both of them are syntax errors. But there is an important distinction between how complicated a syntax error can be. And for that, I'm going to use trusty old Word. Do you remember when Word only had spell check? And you got the little red lines for the first time and you were like, oh, that's awesome. And then grammar check came along. So grammar check has had an effect on my grammar. And that's true. I actually have learned things from it. There is a difference in the complexity between a spell check error, which is sort of a true false, a black and white, a very yes or no. You either spelled this word correctly or you didn't. And if you have the right dictionary, American English in this case, then Word can say this is spelled wrong or right. You might already know where I'm going with this, though, about the difference for a grammar error. Effect is spelled correctly. I have simply used it incorrectly. There's a lot more going on for Word to understand that I have used this word incorrectly. It's not as black and white as this is spelled wrong or this is spelled right. This second one has to have an entire knowledge of the English language. It has to have understanding. And we're in the world now of, AI, and this kind of stuff is going to become so much part of our lives that it's going to freak us all out. But this really shows us something, that there's a difference between the complexity of a spell check error versus this error. And I'm going to call back to those leveling differences of complexity, starting with a parse exception error. A parse exception error is much more like the spell check. It either is or is not spelled correctly. Black and white, yes or no, true or false. So coming over to our box right here, if you see a parse exception error, then this probably means that you have an encoded element, and you see I have a bracket here and a bracket here as a callback to this is XML. This probably means an encoded element is not well formed somewhere in your finding aid. It is the simpler of the two errors explored here. So I'm going to show you, I happen to know exactly where this error, and actually to go back to the error message, here it says parse exception. Here, it tells us the element type env must be terminated by the matching end tag env. So what has happened here is that somewhere in my finding aid, I have two tags that don't match. Very true, false, black and white, yes, no. This should match this. So the question for this particular error message isn't what's wrong, because I actually know what's wrong now. It's where is this wrong? And this is something that I want to point out. Savvy EAD users, or really anybody who's used to working with code, will see a line and a column number here. That feels like it's telling you where the error is. This isn't actually helpful to you, I'm sorry to say. This is where the parser encountered the error in the parser's code. It is not where the parser found the error in the EAD. If you go to EAD line number 20, column 57, you will not find your missing env tag. So that is a red herring. Don't follow it. Don't follow this instruction of location instruction when you will get a parse exception error. So let's go look at this error and let's talk about how to solve it. Here's my parsing error collection. I put this collection together. I know exactly where the parsing error is, so I'm going to bring you straight to it and cheat. It's in my scope and content note right here. And here's a good example of a common encoding error where someone in the past was hand encoding an emphasis tag in EAD, very common in the past, and they mistyped the closing tag. Now, of course, there could be all different variations on this, but the very basic point here is one thing doesn't match another thing. If you make these two things match, and you'll see the colors change, ta-da, I have solved the issue. But that's not real life, because this is only a finding aid that it has nothing. There's no children. I only have one note. So real life is more like this, where you have hundreds of components or archival objects in a giant, well-processed, fully described collection. You could have well-formed issues all over the place, parsing issues all over the place. How do you find it? So remember, or this is a prompt, that in my flowchart, you might notice eventually when you start to use it, that all arrows point here. Export the record as EAD. You might not be after EAD. You might never have even used EAD. You want a PDF. But the best way to find the error that's creating your PDF error, unless you immediately know where it is to export the record as EAD, because even when a record won't export as PDF, it probably will export as EAD. So open the record as EAD. Export the record as EAD, and then here it says, open EAD file in an editor that recognizes XML. And this is where you say, I don't have an editor that recognizes XML. And here's where I remind you that I gave you a handout. So what you're about to see me do, you should be able to do after you read my handout. This is the real life collection, which I've called it, exported as EAD directly from ArchivesSpace. The first thing I'm going to do in my code editor is a right click and format. All code editors have this option. If it's not right click for you, it's something else. And this creates a human readable, but you can see how large my collection is. This creates a human readable version of my XML file. And immediately upon opening an XML file in an editor that recognizes XML, it will immediately complain. And so I want you to look on the right-hand side as I scroll. It's all a bunch of text that looks the same, but see that red line that's coming right there? That red line tells me, here's my error. And when I hover over it, it gives me the exact same message. The element pers name, in this case, must be terminated by the matching end tag pers name. So by using the editor, I can find where in the huge hierarchy my error, or plural errors, occurs, because as you solve the first one, your editor will continue to validate, and it will continue to find all of the different places where you have mismatched tags. And I don't recommend making your changes in EAD and then importing back in. I recommend going back into ArchivesSpace, finding these errors, and then changing them in ArchivesSpace. So that's great for our scenario B. But you'll notice how many more boxes there are on the screen. That's because scenario A is more complicated. Scenario A says validation exception. Down here, we begin to read, this means something about your record doesn't meet the expectations of the style sheet trying to transform EAD into PDF. This is a more complex error. And the reason for that is because this starts to shade into whether or not something is valid XML, which is actually quite low barrier to meet. It starts to care about whether this is valid EAD, the type of XML specific to the archivable profession, and which has its own grammar, a way of using elements in order or with other elements or whatever to create a syntax appropriate or a syntax correct sentence in this case, or actual EAD in another case. So this becomes a whole different level of complexity, where if you've already used EAD before and you used a validator, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, this is a new journey for you. So a few things about validation errors. The first is, let's go back, and I'm actually going to close the parse error so that I don't get lost in it. In the parse error, I told you that the only thing that you really needed was to read the error and to ignore the location. This time, though, I am telling you that the location can help you. So here we go, validation exception. The next thing this error message says, I hope you can see this, I'll make this a little bigger. It says file, ArchivesSpace, style sheets, ASEAD PDF.xsl 81957. What does this mean? The first time I told you, so this means that on line 819 of this style sheet is where ArchivesSpace hit the error that gave you your validation error. It does continue to tell you more. FO list block is missing child elements. I kind of recognize the word list. I know what child elements are. Required content model marker list item, see position 819. This is not a user-friendly error message. I didn't know what ArchivesSpace was talking about the first time that I read this. So what I did was I went to go find the ASEAD PDF.xsl, and I wanted to go find 819. While I told you that that wasn't going to help you the first time, this time it really will help you. So how do you find this? Google ArchivesSpace GitHub. Go to the ArchivesSpace GitHub and follow the path that you were given ArchivesSpace style sheets, and I have it memorized, of course. So here I am on the ArchivesSpace GitHub, ArchivesSpace style sheets, ASEAD PDF.xsl. And then once you get here, even though you're not maybe comfortable or familiar reading with what's on the screen, hold on, bear with me. But before you do anything, come up here to this drop-down menu under Files, come to Tags, and select what version of ArchivesSpace you're on. Because this PDF, this style sheet, the way that EAD exports, everything is version dependent. So I am going to explicitly select 3.5.0 because that's where we're on. You might be on 3.3, you might be on 3.4. So select 3.5.0 for me, let the page reload. And now I'm going to go on a journey through this file that I will admit that I cannot understand. I have a general knowledge of XSL style sheets from back in my work experience, but I can't really read this either, frankly. But I'm still going to go down to line 819. Oh my goodness. 819. 819, right there. I see some familiar terms. We were told about a list block. That sounds right. I still can't really understand what does this mean? And I'm not expecting you to know what this means. I'm just telling you to go here for hints, for clues, for keywords, for things that might help you understand what you're looking at. Up here is the thing that I needed when I solved this problem. This section header says this section, pretty much all this, of which 819 is part, formats index and child elements for index entry elements, corp names, subjects. This gave me the insight I needed to search for an index note, which I know is a list which has child elements. So clue A, clue B, clue C, clue D all came together in my brain to be like, oh, maybe this is an index element problem. So in one case, you could go and just search ArchivesSpace, the resource, for your index element, which might be at the top. So here's our validation error collection. And of course, here's my sneaky validation error. But in this case, I suggest also that you head straight for EAD. You don't necessarily have to go look at the style sheet. You're just looking for clues on the style sheet. In the end, export the record as EAD. Open the EAD file in an editor that recognizes XML. And now we're going to get slightly more complicated in making that make sure that that editor knows that it's not looking just at XML. It is looking particularly at EAD. Just like Word has to know this is American English, and you need to apply the rules of American English to this grammar syntax issue. So how do we do that? I'm actually going to demonstrate that by using what is, I think, a tiny itsy bitsy bug. So over here, this EAD file is my very short validation record scenario. I have an index. It's down there at the bottom of the screen. But remember, in the real life collection, I got a squiggly red line, just like in Word. Here's my squiggly red line with my error message, which isn't happening to be coming up. There it is. There's my error message. When I look at this exact same scenario, there's no squiggly lines. And this is a sneaky validation error because this paragraph text is fine. This is fine. It's got an open and closing tag. It's fine. The problem is that this index node doesn't have any children. And you wouldn't know that by just looking at the XML that this needs children. You wouldn't even know it by looking at this index in ArchivesSpace. It doesn't say that there's any other required elements. There's no reason for you to think that this element as it is on the screen right now is not perfectly fine unless you have memorized the EAD tag library, which even I have yet to do. So now you have to know the difference between an XML document being well-formed, spell checked, versus valid, which is grammar checked. This is a simplistic comparison, but bear with me. Now, I'm actually going to show you how to do this. If you export EAD directly from ArchivesSpace, you get this handy dandy header, which none of you need to know exactly what any of that means. But that header declares some things to my code editor here. It declares that this is an XML document. So my XML document editor was able to go and find my red squiggly line in my prior example. But it also tells my code editor, not only is this XML, this is EAD, a particular flavor of XML specific to the archival profession, validated according to those grammar rules. The first 15 times that I opened this finding aid in this to try to come up with this presentation, the validator didn't kick in. It took me a week to determine that starting in ArchivesSpace 350, there is an extra S on HTTPS right up there on line 3. Watch the index element with your eyes. Try to ignore my screen, my cursor is, I know that my cursor is going up here, but ignore my cursor and just look at the index element down here on line 38. I'm going up, removing that S, and now I have a red squiggly line. This is no longer just an XML error. This is particularly an EAD error, and it sounds familiar. Child elements are missing from element index. And then it tells me what are the things that are supposed to be here instead. Now, going beyond this is, knowledge of EAD that you may or may not have. How to correct this is knowledge of EAD that you may or may not have. But this is the main takeaway I want you to have is, if you get a PDF export error, you almost undoubtedly have an XML error. You could have an XML error that's as simple as saying a word is misspelled or something isn't complete or doesn't match. Or you could have an EAD error where the exact type of EAD that we use needs to be validated to be sure that it is complete. This is a validation error. And if you export your EAD into an environment like this, which remember, I've given you a PDF on how to set up, if you've exported it from ArchivesSpace 350, then you need to remove the space. I'm sorry that I have to give you an additional clarifier like that, but you just saw, if you pay attention down here at index, when I put the S back, that disappeared. When I took the S away, it appeared. And that is all I have the time for.
Thank you, Valerie. You do have a few extra minutes if there's anything else you'd like to clarify.
Well, I'll see if anybody, let's see, any questions that I can help clarify?
So far, my favorite question, slightly unrelated, what is the flowchart creation tool? There were 6 pluses on that, so that's a +6 question. But Bree's guess is it whimsical?
It is whimsical, and I could now officially not live without it.
Corey says, I also used Harvard's EAD checker, though it hasn't been updated in a minute. Can it check for validation errors? He says, I think it can check for validation errors.
I'm not sure if anybody has any experience with that, but if I were to speculate off the top of my head, the reason that there would be one specific to Harvard might be because they used to have a EAD site that relied on their EAD looking a particular way. So I don't know if that is the same as saying that it's valid EAD as it is as saying it is valid according to the needs of Harvard. But I bet you, though, that there is a huge overlap between those two things. That whatever comes out of the Harvard, I don't know if this is true or not, but it would be very likely that whatever comes out of the Harvard validator is still valid EAD.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I've also used that tool, Corey.
But it's a very good point. I really don't know. I haven't used it in a long time.
Bree says, thank you for this presentation, Valerie. Your examples were very easy to understand. Yeah, always happy to have Valerie at the forum because we always learn something. And this flowchart is great and already available on our wiki. Eleanor says, thank you for pointing out the parse exception error red herring. I've definitely fallen for that.
Yep, I've fallen for it too.
Sarit wants a Valerie fan group.
I will charge admission.
Yeah. All right. Not seeing any other questions. But yes, Sarit, people agree with you. I'm also a Valerie fan. But no other questions in the chat. So go ahead and say thank you, Valerie. Thank you so much. This was really helpful. This I can already tell you that I am going to save and refer people and myself to the flowchart. That was great. And that is the last presentation of the forum. Sarit's just posted one final time into the chat